In the quiet borderlands of Texas, an unassuming 95-year-old woman was about to impart a lesson one of Mexico's most dangerous cartels would never forget. Ellena Ellie Stewart appeared to be just another elderly farmer, diligently tending her land mere miles from the Mexican border. That illusion held until the day the Los Espectros cartel made the grave mistake of threatening to seize her farm. What these ruthless criminals failed to comprehend was that this gentle-looking grandmother was, in fact, one of America's most skilled intelligence operatives, with over 100 successful missions under her belt during World War II. The moment the cartel's intimidation crossed an unforgivable line, Ellie made 3 phone calls that would irrevocably alter everything. The Los Espectros, led by the notorious victor Lobo Mendes, believed they were dealing with an easy target. Instead, they found themselves confronting a meticulously coordinated operation involving over 60 former intelligence operatives and federal agents. Men and women whose careers and lives Ellie had profoundly shaped decades ago across battlefields and clandestine missions in Europe and Asia. What began as a day of casual threats and intimidation would swiftly transform into an extraordinary saga of courage, unwavering justice, and the unbreakable power of old loyalties. A simple land grab would escalate into one of the most sophisticated operations the border region had ever witnessed, definitively proving that some skills never truly fade, and that the most dangerous adversary isn't always the most obvious one. This is the compelling story of how a 95-year-old former intelligence officer masterfully turned the tables on one of Mexico's deadliest cartels, and in doing so, safeguarded not just her land, but an entire community. Quick pause before we continue. Tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. The morning sun cast long shadows across Ellena Stewart's farm as she walked her property line, her aged hands brushing gently against the wheat stalks that stretched toward the horizon. At 95, her steps were measured yet purposeful, each movement executed with the precise awareness of someone who had spent a lifetime attuned to their surroundings. The border loomed in the distant haze, a stark, ever-present reminder of the invisible line between two worlds. Her morning inspection complete, Ellie headed toward her truck, an old Ford that had certainly seen better days but still ran like a charm. Through the kitchen window of her farmhouse, she caught a fleeting glimpse of William's photograph. Her late husband in his crisp CIA uniform, his smile forever frozen in time. The drive into Val Vista was profoundly familiar. Every bump and turn in the road was as known to her as the lines on her weathered hands. Isabella's diner came into view first, its checkered awnings a familiar sight. Then, the general store, the church spire, and finally, the small, unassuming gas station where Mike's ancient pumps still required manual operation. "Morning, Mrs. Stewart," Tommy, the young attendant, called out as she pulled up. His smile, however, seemed strained today, distinctly different from his usual cheerful greeting. "Everything all right, Tommy?" Ellie asked, immediately noting the unusual tension in his shoulders. "Yes, ma'am, just—" He glanced around nervously before his voice trailed off. "Some men were asking about you earlier. Black SUVs, tinted windows, said they were interested in buying property in the area." Ellie's expression didn't change, but her mind cataloged the information with practiced efficiency. "Did they now? And what did you tell them?" "Just that you've owned your farm for decades, that it wasn't for sale." Tommy shifted uncomfortably. "They didn't like that answer much." Inside the general store, the atmosphere was equally tense. Martha, who'd run the place for 30 years, barely looked up when Ellie entered. Two men in expensive suits stood by the counter, their attention shifting to the elderly woman as she walked in. "Mrs. Stewart." One of them stepped forward, his accent marking him as Mexican, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "I'm Jorge Vega. My associate and I have been hoping to speak with you." Ellie took her time selecting her items, her movements unhurried. "I don't believe we have any business to discuss, Mr. Vega." On the contrary, he moved closer, his partner flanking him. "We represent a development company interested in properties along the border. Your farm in particular has caught our attention." "My farm isn't for sale." Ellie's voice carried the quiet weight of decades of authority. Jorge's smile tightened. "Perhaps we could discuss this over coffee. Our employer is prepared to be very generous." "Your employer?" Ellie turned, fixing him with a steady gaze. "Would that be Victor Mendes? El Lobo?" The temperature in the store seemed to drop. Martha ducked instinctively behind her counter, and Tommy, who'd followed Ellie in, took an involuntary step back. Jorge's pleasant demeanor vanished. "You seem well informed for a simple farmer, Mrs. Stewart." "And you seem naive for a cartel enforcer," Ellie replied calmly, her eyes never leaving his. "Did El Lobo really think I wouldn't know who was asking about my land?" The second man's hand instinctively moved toward his jacket, but Jorge stopped him with a subtle gesture. "This could have been simple business, Mrs. Stewart. Now it becomes complicated." "No." Ellie placed her items on the counter, counting out exact change with deliberate precision. "Now it becomes interesting." She walked past them, her pace measured, her back ramrod straight. As she reached her truck, Jorge's voice called after her, sharp with a hidden threat. "El Lobo doesn't take no for an answer, old woman. Think carefully about your position." Ellie started her engine, watching in her rearview mirror as the men got into their black SUV. They wouldn't follow her, not yet. First, they'd report to their boss. Tell him about the elderly woman who wasn't afraid, who knew things she shouldn't. Back at her farm, Ellie went straight to her study. Behind William's photograph on her desk was a hidden safe, its combination unchanged in 20 years. Inside lay 3 phones, each one a direct line to people she hadn't contacted in decades, people who owed her their lives, their careers, their freedom. She picked up the first phone, her fingers hovering over the keypad. The Los Espectros cartel was about to learn a crucial lesson about appearances, about assumptions, and about the mistakes of underestimating someone based on their age. As the sun began its descent over her farm, casting long golden rays across the fields, Ellie Stewart began to plan. She hadn't survived countless missions, hadn't trained generations of operatives to let some cartel thugs intimidate her in her own home. The first phone call would go to Ruth Henderson, her old analyst. The second, to Frank Thompson, the operative she'd saved in Berlin. And the third call would set something in motion that even El Lobo, with all his power and violence, couldn't stop. The war for Val Vista was about to begin, and Ellie Stewart had no intention of losing. Ruth Henderson arrived as the last rays of sunlight painted Val Vista's sky in shades of amber and gold. Her silver Mercedes seemed out of place on the dusty farm road, but the woman who stepped out moved with the confident precision of someone who'd spent decades analyzing threats and calculating odds. At 75, she was 20 years younger than Ellie, but the bond between them had been forged in the fires of Cold War operations that had never made it into any official record. "You know," Ruth said, embracing her old friend, "when I imagined catching up after all these years, I didn't think it would involve a Mexican drug cartel." Ellie led her inside, where maps of Val Vista and the surrounding border region were already spread across her dining room table. "They're not just drug runners anymore, Ruth. Los Espectros has evolved. They're trying to establish permanent infrastructure here." Ruth studied the maps, her analyst's mind already processing patterns and possibilities. "Your farm sits at a strategic crossroads. From here they could monitor both Border Patrol movements and civilian traffic. But why move so openly?" "Because Victor Mendes is getting bold," Ellie replied, pointing to recent cartel activity markers. "The Los Espectros have been pushing north, taking advantage of understaffed border stations. They think an old woman's farm is an easy acquisition." Through the window, a black SUV drove past slowly. The third one that hour, Ruth noticed, but didn't react. "They're watching already. Professional surveillance. These aren't street thugs." "No," Ellie agreed. "They're worse. They're ambitious men who think they're untouchable." She moved to her cabinet, pulling out an old, yellowed file. "Remind you of anyone?" Ruth's eyes narrowed as she examined the photograph. "Berlin, 1944. The Wehrmacht officer who thought he was invincible until a certain OSS agent proved him wrong. Colonel Mueller." Ellie nodded, memories of that operation still sharp despite the decades. "He had the same arrogance, the same blind spots. Men like that never expect to be outmaneuvered by those they consider beneath them." As they talked, more vehicles began gathering at the abandoned gas station 2 miles down the road. The Los Espectros were setting up their first local base of operations, confident in their show of force. "Frank Thompson will be here by morning," Ruth reported, checking her secure phone. "He's bringing some friends, former operators who've been itching for a worthy cause. And the others? Responding exactly as you predicted. 20 confirmed so far, all veterans of operations you either ran or supported. The network is still strong, Ellie. Loyalty like that doesn't fade." A soft knock at the door interrupted them. Isabella Ruiz, the diner owner, stood there, looking nervous. "Mrs. Stewart, they're in town. At least 30 of them, taking rooms at the motel, asking questions about you and your land." Ellie thanked her for the warning, noting how quickly the community was choosing sides. "They'll start with intimidation," she explained to Ruth after Isabella left. "Property damage, threats, trying to isolate us from the town. Standard cartel playbook." Ruth agreed, but they've never dealt with someone who wrote the book on counterintelligence operations. The next few hours were spent in careful planning. Ruth's laptop connected them with other members of their old network, retired CIA operatives, former military specialists, and intelligence analysts who'd never forgotten what they owed Ellena Stewart. As night fell fully over Val Vista, the cartel's presence grew more obvious. Motorcycles roared through the streets, black SUVs patrolled the outskirts, and men in expensive shirts and cheap suits began appearing in local businesses, making it clear that resistance would be costly. "They're moving faster than expected," Ruth observed, watching another convoy of vehicles pass by. "Mendes must be personally invested in this operation." "Good," Ellie replied, her voice carrying the same steel that had guided countless operations decades ago. The more resources he commits, the more vulnerable he becomes. Remember Santiago? Ruth smiled slightly. The operation where you turned a drug lord's entire security force against him? That was 30 years ago, Ellie. The principles haven't changed. Men like Mendes rely on fear and money to build their empires. Take those away. She gestured to the maps where their initial counter-moves were already marked. A message came through on one of their secure channels. Frank Thompson had crossed into Texas, bringing with him a team of former special operators who jumped at the chance to help the legendary Ellena Stewart. "It's starting, isn't it?" Ruth asked, recognizing the familiar determined look in her old friend's eyes. "No," Ellie corrected her, moving to the window to watch another cartel vehicle pass. "It started the moment they thought an old woman's farm would be an easy target. Now, we're just setting the terms of their education." Outside, Val Vista had grown quiet, but it was the artificial quiet of a town holding its breath. The Los Espectros had made their first moves, establishing their presence with the subtlety of predators marking their territory. What they didn't realize was that they'd walked into a web decades in the making, spun by a woman who'd spent her life turning stronger enemies' strengths against them. In her kitchen, Ellie prepared coffee while Ruth continued monitoring cartel movements. They'd need to be sharp for what was coming. The next few days would determine not just the fate of her farm, but of the entire community. El Lobo and his men thought they were hunting easy prey. They were about to learn the difference between age and experience, between fear and strategy, between thugs with guns and professionals with purpose. "They'll make their first real move soon," Ruth noted, marking another cartel vehicle's position on their map. "Probably tonight. Something to show the town they mean business." "Let them," Ellie replied, her calm masking the strategic mind that was already 3 moves ahead. "Every action reveals something about their operations, their hierarchy, their weaknesses. By the time they realize their mistake, it'll be too late." The night deepened over Val Vista, and 2 very different forces prepared for the coming conflict. One relied on violence and intimidation, the other on decades of experience and unshakable loyalty. The Los Espectros thought they were dealing with a simple land grab. Instead, they'd stumbled into a master class in intelligence operations, untaught by a teacher they'd gravely underestimated. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The attack came at midnight, just as Ellie had predicted. 3 black SUVs pulled up to her front gate, their headlights cutting through the darkness. Men emerged, carrying gasoline cans and crude explosive devices. The Los Espectros' traditional warning to those who refuse their demands. What they didn't expect was the silent figure watching them through military-grade night vision goggles from the barn roof. Frank Thompson had arrived an hour earlier, his team of former operators already in position around the property. At 72, he moved with the same precision that had made him one of the CIA's most effective field agents. 6 Tango at the gate, he whispered into his radio. "Standard cartel intimidation setup, amateur hour." The cartel men cut the chain on Ellie's gate, their movements cocky and unhurried. They'd done this dozens of times before. Burn down a barn, leave some explosives as calling cards, make their point clear. The first man was halfway to the barn when the farm's floodlights blazed to life, catching them in brilliant, blinding illumination. "Good evening, gentlemen." Ellie's voice carried clearly across her property. She stood on her porch, Ruth beside her, both women projecting a calm that came from decades of facing down worse threats. "I believe you're trespassing." The cartel men froze momentarily, caught off guard. Then, the leader recovered, pulling out his pistol. "You should have taken the offer, old woman. Now we do things the hard way." "The hard way," Ellie replied, her voice unwavering, "would be explaining to El Lobo how you lost 6 men during a simple intimidation job." The leader's laugh was cut short by the distinctive sound of multiple weapons being cocked in the darkness around them. Frank's team had them surrounded, their positions carefully chosen and prepared hours ago. "What is this?" the leader demanded, his pistol wavering frantically between targets he couldn't see. "This is your education beginning," Ellie stated flatly. "Leave the gasoline. Take your men. Tell El Lobo that." "My farm isn't worth his time." For a moment, violence hung in the air like a held breath. Then survival instinct won out over bravado. The cartel men retreated, their departure marked by cursing and the spray of gravel as their SUVs accelerated away. "They'll be back," Frank noted, joining Ellie on the porch, "with more men. Better planning." "Of course they will," Ellie agreed. "And we'll be ready. But first they'll report to their bosses, and that's when the real game begins." Inside the main house, Ruth had been monitoring local radio frequencies. "Sheriff Foster got 3 cartel vehicles stopped just outside town. They're trying to establish a staging area at the old Miller property." The Miller farm had been abandoned years ago, its location perfect for monitoring traffic along the border. Ellie studied the property's position on their maps, seeing the larger strategy emerging. They're creating a perimeter. The farm's just one piece of their plan. In town, the Los Espectros were making their presence felt. Isabella's diner had already received a visit, a friendly suggestion that certain customers might not be welcome anymore. The gas station's prices had mysteriously risen, and the general store found its regular deliveries delayed. Sheriff Michael Foster was fighting a losing battle. With only 3 deputies and limited resources, he couldn't be everywhere at once. The cartel knew this, using his stretched manpower to their advantage. "Michael's a good man," Ellie observed, watching another patrol car pass her farm, "but he's playing by rules the cartel ignores." Frank's team had established observation posts around the property, their presence invisible but effective. These men had fought in Afghanistan, Iraq, and countless other battlegrounds. Cartel thugs didn't impress them. Dawn approached, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. The night's events had set something in motion. The Los Espectros would have to respond to this challenge to their authority. Their reputation demanded it. "They're calling in reinforcements," Ruth reported, monitoring encrypted communications. "At least 20 more men crossing the border tonight, professional hitmen, not just street muscle." Ellie nodded, unsurprised. "And our people?" 8 more arrived during the night. Former Special Forces, CIA, even a couple of FBI analysts who remember Hamburg. The Hamburg operation had been one of Ellie's most complex, a multinational effort that had prevented a terrorist attack while keeping all traces of American involvement hidden. The analysts who'd worked that case had never forgotten the woman who made impossible operations succeed. A truck pulled into Ellie's drive, bearing the logo of a local construction company. The driver, a former Navy SEAL, was delivering materials they'd need for the next phase. The Los Espectros were about to learn that taking territory required more than just guns and threats. "They'll target the town first," Ellie predicted, reviewing their intelligence. "Try to isolate us, turn the community against us. Standard cartel tactics. Create fear, offer protection, establish control. Frank checked his weapons, a habit decades of operations had ingrained. The town's already choosing sides. Isabella's boy spotted their surveillance teams this morning, reported everything to us instead of them. This was the part Ellie had planned for, the moment when fear could either break a community or forge it stronger. Val Vista was about to become a battleground, but not the kind the cartel understood. Ruth, Ellie turned to her old friend. Activate the second team. It's time we show El Lobo what he's really dealing with. As the sun rose fully over Val Vista, two forces prepared for the next phase of their conflict. The Los Espectros would respond with what they knew: violence, intimidation, brute force. But Ellie's team would answer with something else, something the cartel wasn't equipped to fight. Because while El Lobo's men had spent the night planning their retaliation, Ellie's network had been setting up something far more dangerous than guns and explosives. They were creating a web of intelligence, surveillance, and community resistance that would turn the cartel's own tactics against them. The real battle for Val Vista was about to begin, and only one side truly understood the nature of the war they were fighting. Victor El Lobo Mendes sat in his armored SUV outside Val Vista, watching the town through tinted windows. His presence alone marked this operation as something special. The leader of Los Espectros rarely handled matters personally. But the report from his men about last night's failed intimidation attempt had caught his attention. The old woman was proving more troublesome than expected. "Tell me again," he commanded, his voice carrying the soft menace that had earned him his nickname. "Every detail." The team leader shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "We approached as ordered, but they were waiting. Professional operators, military-grade equipment, the old woman. She knew we were coming." El Lobo's fingers drummed against his armrest, the only sign of his irritation. In the past 5 years, he had transformed Los Espectros from a minor smuggling operation into one of Mexico's most feared cartels. He hadn't done it by tolerating failure. "Find out everything about Ellena Stewart," he ordered. "Everyone she talks to. Everywhere she goes. I want to know why a farmer has military contractors protecting her land." In town, the cartel's response to last night's humiliation was already being felt. Isabella's diner found its windows shattered before dawn. The gas station supply truck was hijacked just outside town limits. Small warnings, escalating in severity. Sheriff Foster stood in Isabella's diner, photographing the damage, while his deputies collected statements. "Third incident this morning," he reported to Ellie over the phone. "They're sending a message." "They're following a pattern," Ellie corrected, studying the map where Ruth was marking each incident. Creating a corridor of control, isolating key points in town. From a hidden observation post Frank's team had established in the church tower, they watched cartel vehicles establish checkpoints on major roads. Not official roadblocks, just cars parked strategically. Men loitering with obvious weapons, noting who came and went. "They're mapping the town's routine," Ruth observed, analyzing surveillance photos. "Learning patterns, identifying pressure points." Ellie nodded, recognizing tactics she'd seen before in other conflicts. "They'll start recruiting next. Offer protection to businesses, jobs to young men. Create dependencies." Throughout the morning, more cartel members arrived in Val Vista. They came in small groups, looking like ordinary travelers until you noticed the weapons beneath their jackets, the military precision of their movements. El Lobo wasn't just sending thugs. These were trained fighters, veterans of Mexico's drug wars. 40 new faces since dawn, Frank reported, his team tracking each arrival. They're setting up command centers in 3 locations: the old warehouse, the abandoned motel, and the gas station on Route 9. Ellie studied the positions, seeing the strategy behind them. They're establishing a triangle of control. Any move against one position can be countered from the other 2. But while the cartel focused on shows of force, Ellie's network was implementing their own plans. Ruth's analysts had tapped into local security cameras, establishing surveillance on cartel movements. Former intelligence officers blending in as tourists or travelers mapped the cartel's operations while appearing to simply pass through town. At the general store, Martha quietly noted which businesses were visited by cartel members, passing the information through a network of seemingly innocent conversations. The town was learning to watch, to document, to resist in ways the cartel couldn't easily counter. El Lobo made his first public appearance at noon, walking into Isabella's diner like he owned it. His presence commanded attention. Tall, well-dressed, moving with the confidence of a man accustomed to being feared. "Mrs. Ruiz," he greeted Isabella warmly, as if her broken windows weren't his doing. "I'm sorry about this unfortunate incident. Please allow my men to help clean up. Consider it a gesture of goodwill." Isabella, warned in advance by Ellie's people, played her part perfectly. "That's very kind, but the community is already helping. We take care of our own here." El Lobo's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. Through the diner windows, he could see townspeople working together to repair the damage, their unity an unspoken challenge to his authority. "Community is important, ain't it, AC?" he agreed smoothly. "But times are changing. Small towns need protection in these dangerous days. My organization can provide that protection for a reasonable arrangement." "We already have protection," Isabella replied, her voice steady. "Sheriff Foster, our community, and people who care about Val Vista." The implied rejection made El Lobo's jaw tighten briefly. He left money on the counter, far more than necessary for his untouched coffee. "Think about my offer, Mrs. Ruiz. Val Vista is going to change. The only question is whether you change with it or get left behind." From their various observation points, Ellie's people watched El Lobo tour the town, noting how he alternated between charm and subtle threats. He was building his web carefully, identifying which businesses might be susceptible to pressure, which might need more convincing. "He's good," Ruth admitted, reviewing the surveillance. "Professional. This isn't his first takeover." "No," Ellie agreed, "but it will be his last." She turned to Frank, who was preparing his team for night operations. "Start phase 2. Let's show El Lobo what he's really walked into." As evening approached, the cartel's presence grew more obvious. More vehicles arrived, more men took up positions around town. They were establishing dominance, making sure everyone in Val Vista understood the new power structure. What they didn't realize was that every move they made, every position they established, was being recorded, analyzed, and factored into a plan decades in the making. Ellie watched the sun set over her farm, remembering other operations, other enemies who had thought themselves invincible. "It's going to get worse before it gets better," she told Ruth, seeing the worry in her friend's eyes. "El Lobo won't accept rejection. He'll escalate until he forces a confrontation. That's what we're counting on, Ruth replied, understanding the strategy. Because while the cartel was focusing on controlling the town, Ellie's network was preparing something far more devastating. They were building a case that would not only destroy Los Espectros' operation in Val Vista, but would dismantle their entire organization. The real question was whether the town could withstand what was coming, because El Lobo hadn't earned his name through patience or mercy, and his next move would test Val Vista's resolve to its limits. The Los Espectros struck at 2:00 in the morning, coordinated attacks across Val Vista that turned the quiet town into chaos. Isabella's diner erupted in flames first, followed by the general store and 3 other businesses that had refused El Lobo's protection. The night filled with sirens as Sheriff Foster's deputies scrambled to respond. Ramon Ortiz, El Lobo's local commander, supervised the operation from his black SUV, speaking into a satellite phone. "The message is being delivered," he reported. "The town will understand by morning." What Ortiz didn't know was that every word he spoke was being recorded by equipment Frank's team had planted hours earlier. From her farmhouse command center, Ellie and Ruth monitored the cartel's communications, mapping their command structure in real time. "They're using military-grade encryption," Ruth noted, her fingers flying across her laptop. "But they're still following cartel protocols. Predictable. Repetitive." Sheriff Foster's voice crackled over their secure radio. "We've got wounded at the general store. Martha took a bad fall trying to save her inventory. These bastards are escalating too fast." Ellie's voice remained steady, despite the chaos unfolding across her town. "Michael, get everyone to the church. Father O'Connor is expecting them. We've got medical support standing by." The church had been prepared hours earlier, stocked with supplies and staffed by 2 former combat medics posing as travelers. This was part of Ellie's strategy, not just resisting the cartel, but protecting the community during the fight. Through their surveillance network, they watched Ortiz's men move through town with military precision. These weren't ordinary cartel thugs. They were trained fighters, executing a carefully planned operation to break the town's spirit. 4 more teams moving in from the south, Frank reported from his observation post. They're heading for the residential areas, making sure everyone sees what happens to those who resist. But Val Vista's residents weren't reacting as expected. Instead of cowering in their homes, they were emerging to help their neighbors. A human chain passed water buckets to fight the diner's fire. Others helped Martha's family salvage what they could from the general store. "This isn't going according to their plan," Ruth observed, noting the increasing frustration in the cartel's communications. "They expected terror, not unity." Ellie smiled slightly, remembering other operations where community solidarity had overcome brute force. Fear only works when people feel isolated. Val Vista isn't standing alone anymore. The cartel's response was swift and brutal. Ortiz ordered his men to break up the civilian responses, sending armed teams to disperse the impromptu firefighting efforts. But each time they scattered one group, another formed elsewhere. Sheriff Foster found himself facing an impossible choice when Ortiz's men demanded he order the townspeople back to their homes. His deputies were outnumbered, outgunned, and legally restricted. "This isn't a police matter anymore," Ortiz told him coldly. "Stand down or we'll consider you part of the resistance." Foster's response came through clearly on Ellie's radio. "Then I guess I'm resisting. These are my people, and you're nothing but criminals with delusions of authority." The sheriff's defiance marked a turning point. Throughout Val Vista, people who had initially hesitated now chose sides. The hardware store owner distributed firefighting equipment. The local clinic opened its doors to the injured. Every act of resistance was met with cartel violence, but every act of violence only strengthened the town's resolve. "They're calling in reinforcements," Ruth reported, intercepting cartel communications. "El Lobo is not happy. This was supposed to be a simple terror operation." Ellie studied the tactical display showing cartel movements across town. "They've committed their forces, exposed their command structure, and demonstrated their tactics. Everything we needed them to do." Frank's voice came through their secure channel. "Ma'am, we've identified their primary communications hub, the old water tower. They're running their entire operation through it." "Good," Ellie replied. "Keep monitoring. Let them think they have the advantage." She turned to Ruth, who was already coordinating with their extended network. "How many of our people are in position?" 28 operators scattered across town, another dozen ready to move in when needed. We've got eyes on every cartel leader except El Lobo himself." The fires continued to burn, but they had achieved the opposite of their intended effect. Instead of breaking Val Vista's spirit, they had forged it stronger. By dawn, the town had changed. Not in the way El Lobo had planned, but in a way that would prove far more dangerous to his operations. Ellie watched the sun rise over her farm, smoke from the town's fires painting the sky in shades of gray. The night's violence had been predictable. Cartels always resorted to force when faced with resistance, but in doing so, Los Espectros had revealed something crucial about their organization. "They're professional," she explained to her team as they regrouped. "But they are possibly. They follow patterns, establish protocols, and that's going to be their downfall." Sheriff Foster arrived at the farm as morning broke, his uniform smelling of smoke, his face streaked with soot. "We've got 15 injured, no fatalities. The fires are under control, but they're not done. This was just their opening move." "No," Ellie agreed. "They're not done, but neither are we." She moved to the maps where Ruth had marked every cartel position, every command center, every vulnerability they'd identified during the night's chaos. "El Lobo thinks he's teaching Val Vista a lesson about power. Instead, he's about to learn one about intelligence. Because while the Los Espectros had spent the night demonstrating their capacity for violence, Ellie's network had been gathering evidence, tracking communications, and identifying the weaknesses in their organization. The next phase would target something far more valuable than buildings or businesses. It would strike at the heart of the cartel's operations. Morning revealed the extent of the cartel's attack on Val Vista. Burned buildings stood as stark reminders of the night's violence, but something else had emerged from the ashes. A sense of unified defiance that El Lobo hadn't anticipated. At his temporary command center in the abandoned motel, he faced the first signs of dissent within his own organization. "The old woman is making us look weak," Ramon Ortiz argued, his frustration evident. "We burned half the town and they're still resisting. We need to hit hard or make an example." "You think I don't know how to break a town?" El Lobo's soft voice carried more menace than any shout. "Your tactics last night were clumsy, obvious. Now every law enforcement agency in Texas will be watching Val Vista. On Ellie's farm, that was exactly what they'd been counting on." Agent Christopher Reed of the FBI arrived, dressed as a local rancher, his presence unknown even to Sheriff Foster. The agent's arrival marked the beginning of Ellie's counteroffensive. 4 cartel lieutenants identified, Reed confirmed, reviewing the surveillance footage Ruth's team had gathered. Financial transactions, communication patterns, direct links to operations in Mexico. You've given us more actionable intelligence in one night than we've gathered in 6 months. Ellie studied the tactical display where Frank's team had mapped the cartel's response to last night's operation. They're consolidating their positions, moving their valuable assets to secure locations. Standard procedure when they feel threatened. Which means they're creating a pattern, Ruth added, her analyst's mind seeing the bigger picture. Every defensive move reveals something about their structure, their priorities. Throughout Val Vista, the morning brought subtle changes that the cartel's lookouts failed to notice. The town's routine shifted slightly. Delivery schedules altered. Regular customers changed their habits. New faces appeared in familiar places. Each change was small, but together they formed part of Ellie's strategy. "They've got observers at every major intersection," Frank reported from his hidden position near the hardware store, "but they're watching the wrong things, following standard cartel surveillance protocols." Isabella's diner, though damaged, became the heart of the resistance. While cartel men watched the front, assuming they were monitoring the town's pulse, the real information flowed through the kitchen, where Isabella's network of waitresses gathered intelligence with every coffee served. "El Lobo takes his coffee black. 2 sugars," Isabella reported through their secure channel. "Meets with his lieutenants every morning at 9. Always sits with his back to the wall. Always has 4 guards within reach." These details, seemingly trivial, were exactly what Ellie had been waiting for. "Patterns," she explained to Agent Reed. "Even the most professional criminals fall into them. They can't help themselves." The cartel's next move came at midday. 3 of their local informants, including a gas attendant and a motel clerk, were found beaten in the town square. A message about loyalty meant to discourage cooperation with the resistance. But the informants had been identified days ago. Their information had been carefully managed, used to feed the cartel exactly what Ellie wanted them to know. Each betrayal had been choreographed to reinforce El Lobo's paranoia about his organization's security. "They're pulling their surveillance teams back," Ruth noted, tracking the cartel's communications. "Consolidating, trying to identify potential leaks in their operation." "Which leaves gaps in their coverage," Frank added. His team was already moving to exploit these openings, placing additional surveillance equipment in now unobserved locations. Sheriff Foster, following Ellie's guidance, made a show of being overwhelmed by the situation. His deputies conducted obvious patrols, while Ellie's people moved freely through the blind spots this created. Every cartel countermeasure was met with a prepared response, though they didn't realize they were following a script written decades ago. "Your people are good," Agent Reed admitted, watching the operation unfold. "This isn't just resistance. It's a systematic dismantling of their operational structure." Ellie allowed herself a small smile. "The Los Espectros built their empire on fear and violence, but they've never faced an enemy who understands intelligence warfare. Every act of brutality gives us more evidence. Every defensive move reveals another weakness." As evening approached, the cartel discovered their first major loss. A shipment of weapons hidden in a warehouse they thought was secure vanished without a trace. The FBI's task force, guided by Ellie's intelligence, had removed it while the cartel's attention was focused on the town. El Lobo's reaction was predictable. He ordered increased security at all their locations, pulling men from surveillance duties to guard their remaining assets. Each defensive adjustment created new vulnerabilities that Ellie's team had anticipated and prepared to exploit. "They'll come for the farm next," Frank warned, noting the cartel's vehicle movements. "They know this all started here. They'll want to make a statement." "Let them come," Ellie replied, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime anticipating enemy actions. "The farm is more than just land. It's bait in a trap they don't even know exists." As night fell over Val Vista, both sides prepared for what was coming. The cartel, believing they were about to reassert their authority, gathered their forces for a decisive strike. But in Ellie's farmhouse, surrounded by maps and surveillance feeds, a different kind of operation was taking shape. "Tonight," she told her team, "we show them the difference between violence and strategy." I turned to Agent Reed. "Is your task force ready?" The FBI agent nodded. "On your signal. Though I still don't understand how you knew they'd follow this exact path." "Because men like El Lobo always do," Ellie explained. "They mistake ruthlessness for strength, fear for control. They never learn that real power comes from understanding your enemy so well that they defeat themselves." The night ahead would prove her words prophetic, though not in any way the Los Espectros could have anticipated. The trap was set, and the cartel was about to learn why Ellena Stewart's reputation in intelligence circles had endured for half a century. The Los Espectros launched their assault on Ellie's farm with overwhelming force. 20 vehicles approached from different directions, their headlights off, moving with military precision through the darkness. El Lobo himself supervised from a command vehicle, certain that this show of force would finally break the old woman's resistance. "All teams in position," Ramon Ortiz reported through their encrypted channel. "The farm is surrounded, no sign of her security teams." Inside her farmhouse, Ellie sat calmly at her kitchen table, seemingly alone. The cartel's thermal imaging showed only a single heat signature in the main building, an elderly woman having her evening tea. It was exactly what they expected to see. "Remember," El Lobo instructed his men, "we take her alive. I want her to watch everything she's built crumble before we finish this." The first team breached her front gate at precisely midnight. They moved in practiced formation, weapons ready, expecting resistance. Instead, they found only silence. No security teams, no former operators, nothing but an old woman's farm in the darkness. "Something's wrong," Ortiz muttered, his instinct screaming warnings. "This is too easy." El Lobo silenced him with a gesture. Through their night vision gear, they watched their men approach the farmhouse. The old woman hadn't moved from her table, hadn't even acknowledged the dozens of armed men surrounding her home. "Mrs. Stewart," El Lobo called out, stepping from his vehicle, his voice carrying authority. "I believe it's time we had our discussion face to face." Ellie's voice carried clearly through the night air. "Come ahead, Mr. Mendes. I've been expecting you." The cartel leader approached the house, flanked by his best men. The door wasn't even locked. Inside, they found Ellie Stewart, looking remarkably untroubled by the invasion of her home. "You've caused me considerable inconvenience," El Lobo stated, studying the elderly woman with cold curiosity. "I've lost shipments, men, credibility, all because you wouldn't accept a simple business proposition." "Business proposition?" Ellie took another sip of her tea. Is that what you call terrorizing a town? Burning people's livelihoods? Threatening their families? It's called progress. The strong reshape the world as they see fit. No, Ellie corrected him. The strong protect what matters. The weak use fear to mask their inadequacies. El Lobo's pleasant facade cracked slightly. Where are your protectors now, old woman? Your military friends? Your hidden operators? Exactly where they need to be. The first explosion shattered the night, followed quickly by two more. But they didn't come from the farm. They came from the cartel's command centers in town. Through her window, Ellie could see the orange glow of fires where the Los Espectros key facilities had been. "What have you done?" El Lobo demanded, his composure finally breaking. "Me?" Ellie's smile carried decades of experience. "I just kept you occupied while others did what needed doing. Your entire operation in Val Vista is being dismantled as we speak." Radio calls began flooding in. FBI tactical teams, guided by Frank's operators, were hitting cartel locations throughout the region. But more devastating were the financial attacks. Every account the Los Espectros used in Texas was being frozen, every front company exposed. "You think some raids and frozen accounts will stop me?" El Lobo snarled. "I'll rebuild and start by making an example of you in this miserable town." "Check your phone," Ellie suggested calmly. El Lobo's device was already buzzing with urgent messages. Ruth's team had just released their accumulated intelligence to law enforcement agencies on both sides of the border. The Los Espectros' entire operational structure was being exposed. "Impossible," he whispered, scrolling through the data. "These are secure locations, protected accounts, years of work." "Did you really think I spent 50 years in intelligence work without learning how to dismantle criminal empires?" Ellie stood slowly, her movements unhurried. "Every move you made in Val Vista was documented, every reaction predicted. You followed the exact patterns we expected." Outside, more explosions lit up the night. The cartel's men were scrambling now, trying to respond to attacks, coming from multiple directions, but they'd lost their command structure, their coordination. Each unit was operating blindly, exactly as Ellie had planned. "Kill her!" El Lobo ordered, raising his own weapon. But before his men could react, the farmhouse's lights went out. In the sudden darkness, chaos erupted. Frank's team, hidden in prepared positions throughout the property, launched their assault. Flashbangs and smoke grenades disoriented the cartel forces. Agent Reed's FBI tactical teams, waiting underground in the old storm drain system, emerged to catch the confused gunmen in crossfire. "Federal agents!" Reed's voice boomed through multiple speakers. "The farm is surrounded. Surrender or be fired upon." El Lobo, realizing too late the magnitude of the trap, tried to flee. But his path to safety had been cut off hours ago. Every escape route led to prepared ambush points. The Los Espectros' reputation for tactical excellence meant nothing against an operation 50 years in the making. "You don't understand," he told Ellie as FBI agents secured him. "This goes beyond Val Vista. I have connections, power you can't imagine." "Had connections," Ellie corrected him. "Right now, every piece of intelligence we've gathered is being shared with authorities throughout Mexico and the United States. The Los Espectros aren't just losing Val Vista, they're being erased." Dawn approached as the FBI processed their prisoners. The farm had become a staging area for one of the largest cartel takedowns in Texas history. But more importantly, Val Vista had been freed from the shadow of fear that had been growing over it. "I've been doing this 20 years, Agent Reed told Ellie as they watched El Lobo being led away. "Never seen anything like this. You didn't just beat them, you dismantled their entire organization." "Because I understood something they didn't," Ellie replied, watching the sun rise over her farm. "True strength isn't about how much fear you can create. It's about how much hope you can protect." But even as the immediate threat ended, Ellie knew their work wasn't finished. The Los Espectros might be broken, but other cartels would be watching, measuring, learning from El Lobo's mistakes. Val Vista had won its freedom, but keeping it would require something more than just tactical victory. It would require transforming a temporary resistance into a permanent defense, turning a community's desperate unity into lasting strength. And as Ellie Stewart watched, her town began to stir in the early morning light. She knew that the real work was just beginning. Painted Val Vista in shades of victory. But the celebrating townspeople didn't notice the unmarked vehicles quietly leaving town. While FBI teams processed El Lobo and his captured men, other cartel members melted away into the landscape, taking with them something more valuable than drugs or weapons: information. "We've got movement on the southern routes," Ruth reported, monitoring their surveillance network. "At least 12 vehicles scattered across different escape paths, too organized to be random." Ellie studied the data from her farmhouse command center, now restored after the night's chaos. "They're not running. This is a strategic withdrawal. Someone's coordinating them." Frank's team, still monitoring cartel communications, picked up fragmented transmissions, suggesting Ruth's assessment was correct. The Los Espectros might be broken, but pieces of their organization remained intact, already adapting to the new situation. "3 of El Lobo's key lieutenants are unaccounted for," Agent Reed confirmed, joining them with fresh intelligence, including his financial officer and his connection to the Nuevo Leon cartel. Sheriff Foster arrived, looking exhausted but determined. The night's events had transformed his town, but not necessarily in ways that made his job easier. "We've got outsiders moving in already, businessmen asking about properties, particularly those damaged in the fighting." "Vultures circling?" Ellie noted grimly. "The Nuevo Leon cartel won't waste time trying to fill the vacuum El Lobo left behind." Isabella's diner had become a temporary command post for the town's recovery efforts. As she served coffee to FBI agents and locals alike, Isabella noticed patterns in the conversation around her. "People are scared," she reported to Ellie. "Not of what happened, but of what comes next." Their fears weren't unfounded. By mid-morning, the first signs of the coming storm appeared. 3 black SUVs crossed the border checkpoint, their occupants carrying diplomatic credentials that were too perfect to be genuine, the Nuevo Leon cartel's advanced team arriving to assess the situation. "They're more sophisticated than Los Espectros," Ruth warned, reviewing their intelligence files. "They operate through legitimate businesses, corrupt officials, legal frameworks. Violence is their last resort, not their first option." In her farmhouse study, Ellie examined documents recovered from El Lobo's command center. "Look at these shipping manifests. The dates don't align with their known operations. El Lobo was moving something else through Val Vista, something important enough to fight this hard to control." Frank's team reported increased activity along the border. "Cartel scouts testing our surveillance gaps. They're mapping our capabilities, trying to understand how we took down Los Espectros so effectively." The town itself was changing. While the visible damage was being repaired, subtle transformations were taking place. New faces appeared in local businesses, asking careful questions about property values, and investment opportunities. Each inquiry seemed innocent enough, but together they formed a pattern. "They're probing," Agent Reed observed, "testing responses, gathering intelligence. This isn't just about territory anymore. They want to understand what happened here." Ellie's network picked up increasing chatter about Val Vista in cartel communications. The town had become notorious overnight, the place where El Lobo's empire crumbled. But with that notoriety came dangerous attention. "3 more cartels have representatives heading this way," Ruth reported, monitoring border crossings. "Everyone wants to know how a small town brought down Los Espectros." In Isabella's dinner, a well-dressed man introduced himself as a representative of a Mexican investment firm. His questions about local businesses seemed routine, but Isabella noticed how his eyes tracked movement patterns, noted security camera positions. "They're already here," she told Ellie during their secure morning briefing. "Not with guns this time, with briefcases and business cards." Ellie gathered her core team as evening approached. The celebration in town was dying down, replaced by an uneasy awareness that their victory might have attracted even more dangerous attention. "The Nuevo Leon cartel won't make El Lobo's mistakes," she explained, marking potential trouble spots on their tactical map. "They'll move slowly, legally, build influence through economic pressure rather than violent intimidation." "How do we fight that?" Sheriff Foster asked, understanding that his legal authority might mean little against corporate lawyers and business licenses. "By understanding what they really want," Ellie replied. "El Lobo's operation wasn't just about drugs or territory. The manifests, the scale of our response, the immediate interest from other cartels. They're all pointing to something bigger." Ruth's analysis team had begun piecing together fragments of data from El Lobo's captured communications. "There's a pattern here, but it's encrypted differently than their usual traffic." Whatever they were really doing in Val Vista, they went to extraordinary lengths to hide it. As night fell, the town seemed peaceful again, but Ellie's team observed increased activity in the shadows. Surveillance photos showed meetings in parking lots, documents changing hands, new players moving pieces into position. "They think the threat is over," Ellie told Frank, as they watched another convoy of unmarked vehicles pass through town. "That's exactly what we need them to think. Because while Val Vista celebrated its liberation from Los Espectros, Ellie Stewart was already preparing for the next phase of the conflict. The Nuevo Leon cartel was coming, but this time they wouldn't face a surprised and unprepared town. This time they'd face an opponent who had learned from victory and was ready for a different kind of war. "El Lobo was just the beginning," she explained to her team. "Now, we find out what was worth fighting so hard to control. And we do it before our new friends decide to show their real intentions." The night deepened over Val Vista, and with it came the sense that while one battle had ended, another was just beginning. But this time, the enemy wouldn't come with guns and threats. They would come with smiles and contracts, with promises and legal documents, with a different kind of weapon that could be just as devastating as any cartel violence. Ruth's discovery came at 3 in the morning, buried in files recovered from El Lobo's command center, shipping manifests, property records, and geological surveys. Seemingly innocent documents that told a devastating story when pieced together. "Ellie, you need to see this." Her voice carried the urgency of someone who had just found a bomb. "It was never about drugs or smuggling. Ruth, Val Vista sits on something they want much more. The farmhouse command center had been restored to its pre-battle organization, screens showing surveillance feeds from across town. Ellie studied the documents, her expression darkening as she understood their implications. "Water rights," she said softly. "Underground aquifers that could supply half of northern Mexico. El Lobo wasn't trying to control Val Vista for drugs. He wanted the water rights." Sheriff Foster arrived as they were mapping the implications. 3 more businesses closed this morning. New owners coming in, all tied to a Mexican development corporation. They're buying up the town piece by piece. Through their surveillance network, they watched the Nuevo Leon cartel's operation unfold. Unlike Los Espectros' brutal tactics, this was a sophisticated economic assault. Business licenses were denied renewal, health inspections suddenly became more stringent, bank loans were mysteriously called in. "They're strangling the town legally," Frank observed from his observation post near the town square. "No violence, no threats, just paperwork and pressure." Isabella's diner remained open, but her suppliers had started having delivery problems. The hardware store found its insurance canceled. Even the local bank was facing audit pressures from its parent company. "Martinez Development Corporation," Ruth read from her research. "Legitimate business on paper, but their board of directors reads like a who's who of cartel financial operators. They've done this before in other border towns." Ellie watched another group of suits enter the town hall, carrying briefcases filled with proposals and permits. "The water rights explain everything. Why El Lobo fought so hard, why the Nuevo Leon cartel moved so quickly. In 10 years, water will be more valuable than oil in this region." Agent Reed, coordinating with FBI financial crimes units, confirmed their suspicions. "They're creating a shell company structure. Once they control enough local businesses, they'll start buying up water rights. It's all perfectly legal on the surface." The town council meeting that evening showcased their strategy. Professional presentations about economic development, promises of jobs and prosperity, subtle reminders of how difficult business had become lately. Everything wrapped in legal paperwork that masked its true purpose. 4 council members are already compromised," Ruth reported, tracking financial transfers. "The cartel's been laying groundwork for months, even before El Lobo made his move." In her farmhouse study, Ellie examined old maps of the region, overlaying them with geological surveys. "The aquifer extends under most of the county. Control Val Vista's water rights, and you control the entire region's future." Frank's team reported increased surveillance activity, but not the military-style operations they'd seen before. These were professionals in expensive cars, conducting surveys, taking photographs, all perfectly legal and utterly threatening. "They're mapping everything," Isabella reported during their secure meeting. "Property lines, water tables, ownership records, building a database of the town's weaknesses." The pressure mounted throughout the day. More businesses received visits from health inspectors or tax auditors. Property assessments suddenly increased. Each action was legal, documented, and deliberately destructive to the town's economy. "This is how modern cartels operate," Agent Reed explained. "They've learned that lawyers and bankers can be more effective than gunmen. How do you fight an enemy that's not breaking any laws?" Ellie's response came as she reviewed decades-old property records. "By understanding what they don't want us to know. El Lobo's operation wasn't just about securing water rights, he was trying to hide something about them." Ruth's analysis team had begun unraveling the complex web of shell companies and front organizations. Each connection revealed more about the cartel's true objective, but also showed how deeply they'd already infiltrated the region's power structure. Local judges, county officials, state regulators, she listed. They've been building their influence network for years. El Lobo's violence almost exposed everything. As night fell over Val Vista, the town seemed peaceful. But behind closed doors, business owners counted dwindling resources, families discussed selling their properties, and the community's spirit began to crack under relentless economic pressure. "They don't need guns," Sheriff Foster observed bitterly. "They're going to own the town through perfectly legal purchases. How do we stop that?" Ellie stood at her window, watching another group of cartel lawyers leave the town hall. By finding what El Lobo discovered. Something in those water rights scared the Nuevo Leon cartel enough to move this quickly. Something worth killing for. Because while Val Vista faced a sophisticated economic siege, Ellie Stewart was piecing together a puzzle that went beyond drug cartels and water rights. The town's location, the aquifer's importance, the cartel's urgency, all pointed to a secret that could change the balance of power along the entire border. "Keep watching," she instructed her team. "They're being careful, but they're also scared. And scared people make mistakes." The night deepened over Val Vista, and with it came the understanding that their real fight was just beginning. The enemy wasn't carrying guns anymore, but their briefcases and contracts could be just as deadly to the town's survival. The truth about Val Vista emerged from a half-century-old military archive. Ruth found it while cross-referencing El Lobo's captured files with historical records. A Department of Defense survey from 1962, marked with the highest security classifications. "It wasn't just water," she explained, spreading the declassified maps across Ellie's dining room table. "The government found something else under Val Vista during the Cold War, something they wanted to keep secret from the Soviets." Ellie studied the geological surveys, her intelligence training helping her see what others had missed. Underground facilities, natural cave systems modified for military use, fallback positions in case of nuclear war. The morning's town council meeting showcased the stakes they were facing. Martinez Development Corporation's lawyers presented their proposal with practiced smoothness, a complete buyout of Val Vista's water rights, accompanied by generous relocation packages for current residents. "This is about preserving the region's future," Antonio Martinez, the cartel's public face, explained to the packed council chamber, "ensuring water security for communities on both sides of the border." But Ellie, watching from the back of the room, saw what others missed. The careful way Martinez avoided certain areas in his presentation, the specific properties his company wanted to acquire first. They weren't just following the aquifer. They were tracing the old military installation's outline. "The cartels must have found the old records," Agent Reed speculated during their secure briefing. "Realize what the government built down there. But why move now, after all these years?" Sheriff Foster arrived with news that answered that question. "Got word from the Army Corps of Engineers. They're conducting a routine survey of the region next month. First time in 50 years they've shown interest in Val Vista." Frank's team, monitoring cartel communications, reported increased urgency in their operations. "They're pushing harder on property acquisitions. Something's got them spooked about that government survey." In Isabella's diner, now one of the few remaining locally owned businesses, the morning crowd buzzed with rumors. The relocation offers were generous, too generous for simple water rights. People were starting to ask questions about why their small town had suddenly become so valuable. Whatever's down there, Ruth concluded, analyzing satellite data, it's worth billions to someone. The question is, to whom? Ellie's investigation led her to her own past. As a young intelligence officer, she'd heard whispers about secret installations along the border. Facilities built not just for war, but for something else. Something the government had wanted to keep hidden, even from its own people. The cartel's legal team made their next move at noon, filing emergency permits for environmental surveys of specific properties. Their target areas matched perfectly with the 1962 military maps. They're not trying to find the old installation, Ellie realized, comparing the documents. They already know exactly where it is. They're racing to secure it before the government remembers what they built here. Agent Reed's FBI team discovered more connections. The Nuevo Leon cartel hadn't just been buying properties. They'd been acquiring specific technical equipment, hiring experts in unique fields. This wasn't about drugs or even water rights. They were preparing for something much bigger. Look at these requisitions, Ruth pointed out. Ground-penetrating radar, specialized drilling equipment, geologists with military clearance. They're planning to access the underground facilities. The afternoon brought more pressure on local businesses. Health code violations appeared from nowhere. Building inspectors found critical safety issues requiring immediate, expensive repairs. The cartel's strategy was clear. Break the town's economy to force a mass property sale. But why? Sheriff Foster asked during their strategy session. Why not just buy the specific properties they need? Because they need to clear the whole town, Ellie explained. Whatever's down there, it's big enough that they can't risk anyone noticing their real operation. Through their surveillance network, they watched the cartel's operation evolve. Technical teams disguised as utility workers began conducting subtle surveys. Equipment was staged in warehouses just across the border. Everything pointed to an operation years in the planning, now accelerating due to the government's sudden interest. The Cold War never really ended, Ellie told her team as night approached. It just changed forms. Now, instead of nations fighting over ideology, we have cartels fighting over secrets buried beneath American soil. The implications were staggering. If the cartel accessed whatever the government had hidden beneath Val Vista, the balance of power along the entire border would shift. But stopping them meant exposing 50-year-old secrets that powerful people wanted to keep buried. We're running out of time, Ruth warned, monitoring communications. The cartel's setting up shell companies faster than we can track them. Once they have legal control of the property, then we change the game, Ellie interrupted, her mind already forming a plan. They think this is about property rights and legal ownership. But I didn't spend 50 years in intelligence work without learning a few things about buried secrets. Because while the Nuevo Leon cartel was fighting to uncover old military installations, they'd overlooked something crucial. Ellena Stewart hadn't chosen Val Vista for retirement by accident. Some secrets went deeper than underground facilities, and some operations never really ended. The night settled over the town, bringing with it the weight of hidden histories and impending confrontation. The cartel thought they were racing against the government to uncover Cold War secrets. They were about to learn that I'm not sure what you're referring to, Mrs. Stewart. The Department of Defense survey, Mr. Martinez, Ellie interrupted, her voice clear and cutting through the stunned silence in the chamber. Dated 1962. It details a highly classified underground facility built right beneath Val Vista designed to protect something of immense strategic value. Something you and your cartel are now desperately trying to access before the government fully remembers its existence. Martinez's face, usually so composed, flushed with a mixture of anger and panic. This is ludicrous! Baseless accusations! We are a legitimate development firm! But the damage was done. Whispers erupted among the council members and townspeople. The three Department of Defense officials, seated in the front row, exchanged grim glances, their carefully maintained anonymity shattered by Ellie's words. Their own secret, meticulously guarded for decades, was now exposed not by a foreign power, but by a 95-year-old farmer. Through their surveillance network, Ruth's team picked up immediate frantic communications from the Nuevo Leon cartel's local command. Their legal team is in full retreat, Ruth reported to Frank. Martinez is demanding exfil. They didn't anticipate this level of intel. Agent Reed moved to Ellie's side, his expression a mixture of awe and professional concern. Mrs. Stewart, that information is still classified at the highest levels. How? Some secrets, Ellie replied, her gaze firm, are known by more people than the government cares to admit. She turned back to the now chaotic council chamber. This isn't about economic development, Mr. Martinez. It's about a scramble for a hidden asset. And your attempts to force the town into selling out are merely a clumsy cover for your illegal intentions. Sheriff Foster, though bewildered, quickly grasped the turning tide. He stepped forward, his voice booming. Mr. Martinez, I'm formally requesting all your permits and documentation for immediate review. And I'll need to speak with those environmental survey teams you've got digging around town. The cartel's public face crumbled. Martinez and his lawyers, exposed and cornered, made a hasty retreat, their smooth promises replaced by hurried threats as they exited the building. They're pulling back all their technical teams, Frank confirmed from his post. Mass exfil initiated. They're spooked. The DOD officials, however, were not retreating. They approached Ellie, their faces stern. Mrs. Stewart, we need to speak with you. Immediately, privately. Indeed, Ellie agreed, a flicker of her old operative's fire in her eyes. I imagine you do, but our discussion will take place on my terms, at my farm, and it will include Agent Reed. After all, you're not the only ones with a vested interest in what's buried under Val Vista. As night fell over Val Vista, the town breathed a collective sigh of relief. The lawyers and the threats of economic ruin had vanished as quickly as they appeared. But Ellie knew the fight wasn't over. The Nuevo Leon cartel might have been deterred, but the secret beneath Val Vista remained, and now the government itself was fully aware that its buried past was resurfacing. What was it, Ellie? Ruth asked later that night. As they sat in the farmhouse, the maps and files once again spread before them. What did they hide down there that's worth cartels and the government risking everything? Ellie looked at William's photograph, her mind drifting back to the Cold War. Something designed to change the course of a global conflict, she replied, her voice soft but resolute. Something that was too dangerous to ever see the light of day. The stakes had just escalated far beyond land and water. The battle for Val Vista had transformed into a geopolitical chess match, and Ellie Stewart, the 95-year-old former intelligence operative, was once again at its center, ready to protect her home and its secrets from powers far greater than any cartel. The real game had truly just begun. Concerns are purely about public safety. Of course they are, Ellie replied calmly, her gaze steady. Just like the DOD's sudden interest in our little town is purely routine. We all have our stories, don't we, Mr. Martinez? The question is, which ones are real? The afternoon brought more pressure from both sides. The DOD officials began subtle investigations of cartel-owned properties, while cartel lawyers filed emergency injunctions to prevent government interference with their legitimate business operations. They're going to force a confrontation, Agent Reed warned. Either side could expose everything just to keep the other from gaining control. Ellie studied the old facility plans, memories of its construction flooding back. The cartel thinks they know what's down there, but they only have partial information. The real secret isn't in any document. It's in understanding why certain choices were made. Ruth's team intercepted cartel communications, suggesting they were preparing for a major operation. Equipment and personnel were being staged across the border, ready to move as soon as they secured legal access. They're not just trying to beat the government to the site, Frank reported. They're planning to strip it completely, leave nothing for anyone to find. As evening approached, Val Vista found itself at the center of an invisible tug-of-war. The DOD officials established surveillance on key properties, while cartel operatives monitored the officials in turn. Both sides waited for the other to make a mistake, to expose their true intentions. William and I chose this farm for a reason, Ellie revealed to her core team. Someone had to watch to make sure old secrets stayed buried. But now that they're surfacing, she opened another file, this one containing photographs from 1962. They showed construction details, security measures, but most importantly, they showed what the government had really built beneath Val Vista. My God, Ruth whispered, understanding the implications. If this gets out... It won't, Ellie assured her, because we're not going to let either side have it. Some secrets need to stay buried, and some need to be destroyed completely. Night fell over Val Vista, and with it came the sense that events were accelerating toward a confrontation none of them might be able to control. The cartel was planning something big. The government was moving to protect its interests, and caught between them was a town sitting on top of a powder keg of Cold War secrets. But Ellie Stewart had spent her life protecting secrets larger than this. As she watched both sides prepare for their next moves, she knew that the real operation wasn't about preserving old mysteries. It was about preventing a new catastrophe. They think this is about the past, she told her team. About old weapons, or hidden gold, or lost intelligence. But William and I buried something far more dangerous, something that could start a war if it fell into the wrong hands. And now we have to make sure it never sees the light of day. The cartel struck at midnight, not with... measured. What William and I helped bury was a warning. Proof of what happens when humanity pushes boundaries it shouldn't. A biological anomaly, contained, but not truly understood. Something too volatile, too dangerous to ever be unleashed. The containment protocols were not just for security, but for survival. A stunned silence fell over the room as Sheriff Foster, Agent Reed, and Ruth absorbed the true weight of her words. The Cold War wasn't just about weapons. It was about the desperate scramble for any advantage, even those that defied nature itself. A biohazard? Agent Reed whispered, his professional calm cracking. Here, under a civilian town. The location was chosen for its isolation, its natural geological stability, and the aquifer, which could act as a natural containment barrier if complications arose, Ellie explained, pointing to specific areas on the old maps. It was never meant to be found again, never meant to be opened. Through their surveillance feeds, they watched as the cartel's excavation teams breached another layer of earth, closer to the heart of the anomaly. Simultaneously, the DoD forces, now fully aware of the stakes, began their own countermaneuvers, securing perimeters and bringing in specialized teams. Both sides were closing in, driven by different motives but equally oblivious to the true nature of the secret they pursued. "They're moving containment equipment to Site B," Frank reported, his voice grim. "The cartel's experts believe they're close to accessing the main chamber. And the DoD is positioning their sealing equipment at Site A," Ruth added, "preparing to permanently entomb the facility." "Neither of them understands," Ellie stated, her voice imbued with a quiet authority that cut through the tension. The containment wasn't just about sealing it away, it was about maintaining a delicate balance. Breach it, and you risk a catastrophe far worse than any war. She moved to her communication console. "It's time. Frank, activate Protocol Nightingale. Ruth, transmit the full analysis to Agent Reed's secure channel. Agent Reed, your priority is to secure the perimeter and prevent anyone from entering the core facility. My target isn't the cartel or the government. My target is the secret itself." Night deepened over Val Vista, its quiet broken by the rumble of heavy machinery and the hushed commands of operatives. The town, once a simple border community, had become the epicenter of a desperate race against time, a forgotten chapter of the Cold War, threatening to unravel decades later. The cartel thought they were claiming a valuable asset. The government believed they were preventing a threat from falling into the wrong hands, but only Ellie Stewart knew the full, terrifying truth about what lay beneath Val Vista, and only she knew how to ensure that some secrets truly stayed buried forever. The final phase of her lifelong mission was about to begin, and the fate of not just Val Vista, but potentially far more, rested on her weathered hands. Interrupted by Ruth's urgent call. The cartel's first excavation team had reached something, not the facility itself, but evidence of its scale. Ground-penetrating radar revealed a vast complex, far larger than anything in the official records. "My God," Ruth whispered, studying the data. "This isn't just a facility. It's an entire underground city. But why? What were they preparing for?" The DoD officials became more aggressive as the cartel's dig progressed. Federal agents began setting up checkpoints, while military personnel in civilian clothes moved specialized equipment into position around the town. "They're not trying to protect old secrets," Ellie realized, watching their deployment pattern. "They're preparing for containment. They think something's going to get out." Frank's team reported increased activity at the cartel's staging areas. More equipment arriving, but now including biological containment units and radiation shielding. Whatever they thought they were going to find, they were taking no chances. "It's time," Ellie announced to her team as evening approached. "We can't let either side reach the facility. What's buried down there isn't a weapon or a secret. It's a truth that could tear the world apart." She opened a final file, one she'd kept separate from all others. Inside were photographs that made even Agent Reed's professional composure crack. Images from 1962 that showed why the facility had been built and why some secrets needed to stay buried. "They're both right to be scared," she told her team. But they're wrong about the solution. We don't need to uncover this or contain it. We need to make sure no one ever finds it. And I know exactly how to do that. Night fell over Val Vista as three forces prepared for confrontation. The cartel, believing they were racing to uncover a powerful secret. The government, desperate to prevent exposure of a half-century-old mistake. And Ellie Stewart's team, preparing to implement a plan that would ensure the real truth remained forever hidden. Because what lay beneath, Val Vista wasn't just a Cold War relic or a buried weapon. It was evidence of something that would change everything, and Ellena Stewart had spent 50 years making sure that change never came. The first breach into the underground facility came at dawn. The cartel's excavation team, working through the night, broke through the outer seal of what appeared to be a massive blast door. Their sophisticated equipment detected a vast open space beyond, but something about the readings made their technical experts hesitate. "They've stopped drilling," Frank reported from his observation post. "Something spooked their survey team. They're calling in their science advisors." Through their surveillance network, Ellie's team watched both the cartel and DoD forces react to the development. The government's response was immediate and revealing. Specialized containment units began moving into position, while men in unmarked hazmat suits appeared at the perimeter. "Look at their equipment," Ruth observed, monitoring the feeds. "They're not just worried about structural collapse or old weapons. Those are biological containment protocols. They're treating this like an outbreak scenario." The morning brought Val Vista's residents face to face with the reality of their situation. Strange equipment appeared throughout town: air monitoring stations, medical screening checkpoints, containment zones marked with innocuous construction area signs. "Tell me the truth, Ellie," Sheriff Foster demanded during their emergency meeting. "What did they really bury under our town?" Ellie studied the latest data from the breach site before responding. "In 1962, something happened that changed how we saw the world. The government didn't build this facility to hide weapons or secrets. They built it to contain questions. Questions no one was ready to answer." At the excavation site, the cartel's technical team made their first attempt to open the blast door. Their sophisticated sensors revealed something that sent them scrambling back in alarm. Within minutes, their own containment teams moved in, setting up airlocks and decontamination stations. "They found traces of something," Ruth reported, intercepting their communications. "Something that matches no known profile. They're implementing full quarantine protocols." The DoD officials dropped all pretense of routine inspection. Military units in civilian vehicles began establishing a perimeter around the town, while senior officials arrived with orders citing national security concerns. "This is now a matter of federal authority," the lead official announced at an emergency town council meeting. "Val Vista is being placed under temporary quarantine. No one enters or leaves without clearance." But the cartel had no intention of surrendering their operation. More equipment arrived through back roads and hidden paths, while their legal team filed injunctions against government interference. The excavation continued under heavy security, with teams working in sealed environments. "Both sides are wrong," Ellie told her core team as they monitored the situation. "They think they're dealing with a containment issue. What they're really facing is a truth that could tear apart everything we think we know." From Isabella's diner, they watched the town transform. Military checkpoints appeared at major intersections, while cartel security teams established their own control points. Residents found themselves caught between competing authorities, each claiming to act in the public interest. The situation reached a critical point when the cartel's team finally breached the inner chamber. Their sensors detected a vast complex of interconnected rooms and corridors. But something about the layout defied conventional architecture. "These readings can't be right," Ruth said, analyzing the data they'd intercepted. "The internal dimensions, they don't match any known construction principles. It's like the space inside is wrong," Ellie finished for her, "because it wasn't built by conventional means. What they buried here wasn't just a facility. It was evidence of something that would change our understanding of reality itself." The DoD's response to the breach confirmed her words. Special units began arriving, their equipment unlike anything standard military forces used. The government was preparing for something beyond a simple containment operation. "They're not trying to keep something in," Frank realized, watching their deployment pattern. "They're trying to keep something out. Something they think might be drawn to whatever's down there." As evening approached, Val Vista found itself at the center of an escalating crisis. The cartel's excavation had revealed rooms filled with strange equipment and inexplicable readings. The government's response suggested they expected catastrophic consequences. "We're running out of time," Ellie announced to her team. "Once they fully breach the main chamber, everything changes. We have to implement the final protocol before that happens." She retrieved a final set of documents from her safe, plans that William had helped her prepare decades ago. They detailed not just the facility's layout, but a fail-safe system designed to ensure its contents never saw the light of day. "The truth isn't meant to be contained or controlled," she explained, showing them the fail-safe triggers. "Sometimes the only way to protect the world is to make sure certain questions remain unanswered." Night fell over Val Vista, bringing with it the weight of impending revelation. The cartel's team prepared for their final push into the facility's heart while government forces positioned themselves for decisive action. But Ellie, Stewart, and her team were ready. They had spent decades preparing for this moment, ensuring that some secrets would remain forever buried beneath the Texas soil. The real question wasn't what lay hidden in those underground chambers. It was whether they could prevent its discovery before both sides unleashed something beyond their control. The facility's main chamber opened like a tomb, decades of stale air rushing out through the cartel's sophisticated filtration systems. Their lead technical team, wearing sealed environmental suits, stepped into a space that defied explanation. The vast room was filled with equipment that looked both ancient and impossibly advanced. "We're getting readings that make no sense," the team leader reported through their secure channel. "The technology here it's like nothing we've ever seen." The DoD's response was immediate and unexpected. Instead of trying to seize control, they began coordinating with the cartel's teams, sharing data and combining resources. Whatever they saw in those initial readings had frightened both sides enough to forge an instant alliance. "They're scared," Ruth observed, monitoring their communications. "Both sides just realize they're dealing with something far beyond what they expected." Ellie watched through their surveillance network as more specialized equipment arrived at the site. The cartel and government forces had established a joint operational command. Their previous conflict forgotten in the face of what they discovered. "It's happening exactly as William predicted," she told her team. The facility wasn't built to contain something dangerous. It was built to hide evidence of something impossible. The main chamber continued to reveal its secrets, banks of machinery that seemed to defy known physics, documentation in languages that didn't match any known writing system, and at the center, a device that both sides' scientific teams refused to approach directly. "They're detecting energy signatures that shouldn't exist," Frank reported from his observation post. "The scientists are saying it's like the laws of physics are different inside that room." Sheriff Foster arrived at Ellie's farm with urgent news. The joint operation was preparing to evacuate Val Vista, citing unspecified environmental hazards. But their real concern was evident in the type of evacuation protocols being implemented. "They're treating it like a pandemic response," he explained. "But the medical teams they're bringing in, they're not looking for diseases. They're monitoring for something else." Through Isabella's diner window, they watched military units setting up quarantine zones while cartel technical teams established monitoring stations throughout town. The previous night's enemies now worked with practiced coordination, united by a common fear. "The device at the center of the chamber," Ruth reported, analyzing intercepted data. "According to these readings, it's active, has been since 1962. But that's impossible with any known power source." Ellie moved to implement the next phase of her plan. While both sides focused on the main chamber, her team began activating systems that had laid dormant for decades. Fail-safes built into the facility's very structure. "William and I didn't just help build this place," she explained to her core team. "We designed it to be destroyed if necessary, to ensure that some discoveries stayed buried." The evacuation order came at noon. Val Vista's residents found themselves being processed through medical screening stations, their possessions scanned with exotic equipment. Both cartel and government personnel watched for specific reactions, though none would explain what they were looking for. "They think exposure has already occurred," Ellie noted, watching the screening process. "They're not trying to prevent contamination, they're looking for signs of change." Inside the facility, the joint scientific team made their first attempt to approach the central device. Their instruments detected patterns that sent them retreating in panic, babbling about spatial anomalies and impossible readings. "Whatever that machine is," the lead scientist reported, "it's not just active, it's responding to our presence, like it's aware." The situation reached a critical point when the first physical changes became visible. The air around the facility entrance began to shimmer with colors that shouldn't exist. Equipment began malfunctioning in patterns that defied explanation. "It's not just the machine," Ruth realized, correlating data from multiple sources. "The whole facility, it's like it's becoming more real, more present, as if it was somehow less solid before we found it." Ellie watched the phenomenon spread, remembering similar events from 1962. "This is why they buried it," she explained to her team. "Not to hide it from people, but to hide it from reality itself, to keep it separated from our world." As evening approached, both the cartel and government forces began to understand the true scope of what they'd uncovered. This wasn't about weapons or secrets or power. It was about something that challenged the very nature of existence. "We need to seal it," the DOD commander announced, his voice carrying genuine fear. "Seal it and bury it deeper than before. Some things aren't meant to be found." But Ellie knew it was too late for that. The breach had started something that couldn't be stopped by simply closing doors or pouring concrete. The facility wasn't just a containment structure. It was a barrier between different versions of reality. "Prepare for the final phase," she instructed her team. "What happens next will decide not just the fate of Val Vista, but the nature of everything we think we know." Night fell over Val Vista, bringing with it the weight of impending revelation. The cartel's team prepared for their final push into the facility's heart, while government forces positioned themselves for decisive action. But Ellie, Stewart, and her team were ready. They had spent decades preparing for this moment, ensuring that some secrets would remain forever buried beneath the Texas soil. The real question wasn't what lay hidden in those underground chambers. It was whether they could prevent its discovery before both sides unleashed something beyond their control. The morning brought changes to Val Vista that no one could explain away. Shadows fell in wrong directions. Distances between buildings seemed to shift when no one was looking directly at them. Both cartel and government scientists worked frantically to understand readings that contradicted known laws of physics. "It's like reality itself is becoming uncertain," Ruth reported, analyzing data from their monitoring stations. "The effect is spreading outward from the facility, growing stronger with each hour." Ellie gathered her core team in the farmhouse, knowing it was time to reveal the full truth. In 1962, we didn't build a facility to contain something dangerous. We built it to hide evidence that our world isn't as solid as we think it is. Through their surveillance network, they watched the joint operations struggling to contain something they couldn't even properly measure. The cartel's sophisticated equipment and the government's classified technology proved equally useless against a phenomenon that seemed to ignore physical laws. "The device in the central chamber," Ellie explained, "isn't a machine in any sense we understand. It's more like a window that shouldn't exist, a point where different versions of reality overlap." Sheriff Foster arrived with reports that confirmed her words. People in town were experiencing moments of disorientation, seeing things that couldn't be there, remembering events that hadn't happened yet. "Both sides think they can control this," Ellie continued. "They believe with enough technology or power they can harness whatever's happening. But some forces aren't meant to be controlled. They can only be contained." The cartel and government teams made their first serious attempt to approach the central device. Their heavily shielded instruments detected patterns that suggested the impossible, spaces that were somehow larger on the inside than the outside, time flowing at different rates within the same room. "We're losing containment," the DoD commander announced over their emergency channel. "Whatever barrier this facility created, it's failing." Isabella's diner became a gathering point for townspeople experiencing the strange effects. Some reported seeing shadows of buildings that had never been built. Others described memories that seemed to come from lives they hadn't lived. "The town itself is part of the containment system," Ellie revealed to her team. "The pattern of buildings, the layout of streets. It was all designed to create a kind of stabilizing effect to keep our version of reality dominant." Frank's team reported increasing anomalies around the breach site. Equipment malfunction became normal as basic physical constants began to fluctuate. Even their most hardened operators struggled to maintain their composure in an environment where natural laws seemed optional. "We need to implement the fail-safe," Ruth urged, watching the effects spread, "before it grows beyond our ability to contain it." But Ellie knew the cost of that decision. The fail-safe wasn't just about sealing the facility. It would require sacrificing everything within the containment zone, including Val Vista itself. "There's something you all need to understand," she told the gathered townspeople at an emergency meeting. "This town wasn't just built here by chance. Every person who felt drawn to settle here, every family that stayed generation after generation, you're all part of the barrier." The revelation stunned even the hardened cartel members and government agents. The town's residents weren't just living above a containment facility. They were an active part of its security system. "Your connections to this place, your memories, your lives here," Ellie explained. "They help anchor our reality, make it more real than the alternatives trying to break through." As night approached, the effects intensified. Streetlights cast multiple shadows. Windows sometimes showed different scenes depending on the angle of view, and people reported brief glimpses of other versions of themselves going about different lives. "The breach weakened the barrier," Ellie told her team as they prepared for what came next. "But it also gave us one chance to strengthen it permanently, if we're willing to pay the price." The cartel and government forces began to understand they were dealing with something far beyond their experience. Their weapons were useless, their technology inadequate, their very understanding of reality proving insufficient. "We can't fight this," the cartel's leader admitted, watching his men struggle with equipment that no longer worked reliably. "Whatever's happening, it's beyond any of us." But Ellena Stewart had spent 50 years preparing for this moment. The fail-safe she and William had designed wasn't just about containing an anomaly, it was about making a choice between realities. As Val Vista's familiar world began to waver and shift, she gathered her allies for one final briefing. The next few hours would determine not just the fate of a town, but which version of reality would become permanent. And as the barrier between worlds grew thinner, Ellie Stewart prepared to implement a plan that would require sacrifices none of them had imagined possible. The town gathered in Val Vista's old church as reality continued to shift around them. The building itself seemed to resist the strange effects, its foundation somehow more solid than the wavering world outside. Ellie stood before them, knowing that what she asked next would test their faith in ways no sermon ever had. "The facility's containment is failing," she explained to the assembled faces. "But your connections to this place, your memories, your beliefs about what's real, those are stronger than any walls we could build." Through the church windows, they could see both cartel forces and government agents working together, following Ellie's instructions to establish a pattern of equipment around the town's perimeter. But the real work would depend on the townspeople themselves. "Each family needs to choose their strongest memory of Val Vista," Ellie instructed. "The moment that makes this place most real to you. Those memories will become anchors, helping stabilize our reality against what's trying to break through." Isabella was the first to understand. "The day I opened the diner," she said firmly, "when my father handed me the keys and said this place would be part of Val Vista's heart forever." One by one, others followed. The hardware store owner remembered his grandfather's lessons about serving the community. The school teacher recalled her first class 30 years ago. Each memory seemed to make the air more solid, the world more certain. "It's working," Ruth reported, monitoring their instruments. "The reality fluctuations are stabilizing wherever people are focusing on their connections to the town." But the process took its toll. As each person committed to their anchor memory, other memories began to fade. The price of stability was the gradual loss of less essential recollections, as if their minds were focusing all their energy on holding one moment perfectly clear. "You need to understand what you're sacrificing," Ellie warned them. "The stronger you make these anchor points, the more of your other memories you'll lose. You're not just remembering, you're becoming part of the barrier itself." The cartel's technical teams reported similar effects around their equipment. Devices aligned with the townspeople's memories seemed to function normally, while others began to fail or show impossible readings. "The human mind," Ellie explained to the DoD commander, his face a mask of bewilderment, "is more capable of holding contradictions than any machine. That's why the original containment design centered on the town itself, not just the facility." Frank's team, positioned around Val Vista's perimeter, watched as the visible anomalies began to respond to the anchoring process. Areas where memories were strongest showed fewer reality distortions, while places with less emotional connection became increasingly unstable. "We're losing the outer edges," Ruth warned, tracking the effect. "The town's boundaries are shrinking as people focus on central locations." Sheriff Foster organized teams to help elderly residents reach memory-strong locations. Each person's choice of where they felt most connected to Val Vista helped establish new points of stability in the fluctuating reality. "My whole life has been protecting this town," he said, choosing his own anchor point at the station where he'd first been sworn in. "Never knew I was protecting reality itself." The cartel members and government agents found themselves caught in the process as well. Those who had spent time in Val Vista began experiencing the same effects, their memories of the town becoming sharp and clear, while others faded into uncertainty. "Focus on what you know is real," Ellie instructed them, her voice calm amidst the growing strangeness. "Every certain memory strengthens the barrier. Every doubt weakens it." As night approached, the strain began to show. People struggled to remember things outside their anchor points. Family histories became centered around single moments, lifetimes of experiences condensing into specific memories that helped hold reality together. "We're not just choosing what to remember," Isabella realized, watching her own memories of the diner become increasingly focused. "We're choosing which version of Val Vista becomes permanent." Ellie knew they were reaching a critical point. The anchoring process was working, but at a cost none of them had fully understood. Each person who committed to holding reality stable was slowly becoming more like a living foundation stone, their consciousness increasingly focused on their chosen moment. "There's no going back," she told her team as they monitored the process. "Once these anchor points are fully established, the people holding them will never be quite the same. They'll remember who they are, but their connection to that one perfect memory will define them." Through the long night, Val Vista's residents held on to their chosen moments, their shared belief in what was real becoming a stronger barrier than any physical wall. The facility below might have contained the anomaly for 50 years, but the town itself would become its permanent prison. As reality stabilized around these human anchor points, Ellie prepared for the final phase of the containment plan. The price was higher than anyone had imagined, but the alternative, letting multiple versions of reality blur together, was unthinkable. The sun would rise on a Val Vista that was more solid, more real, but also fundamentally changed. Its people would remain themselves, but each would carry the weight of holding a piece of reality stable through the power of their most precious memory. The first light of dawn revealed a Val Vista transformed, not by physical change, but by the weight of choice. Each anchor holder had become a living cornerstone of reality, their chosen memories burning so bright that other recollections faded like stars at sunrise. The town's geography had shifted subtly, places of strong memory drawing closer together while spaces between them became uncertain. "The containment field is stabilizing," Ruth reported, her own memories now centered on the moment she first joined Ellie's team. "But the anchor holders, they're changing in ways we didn't expect." Isabella stood in her diner, every detail of her father handing over the keys perfectly preserved, while years of customer interactions blurred together. The cartel's technical team confirmed what they were all experiencing. Reality was becoming more solid, but only within the framework of these preserved moments. "It's not just memory," Ellie explained to the gathered leadership. "Each anchor point is like a nail holding down the fabric of our world. But the people serving as those anchors, they're becoming more like living photographs, forever capturing one perfect moment." Through their surveillance network, they watched as the effect spread. The hardware store owner could recall every tool's place from his grandfather's time, but struggled to remember his own children's births. The school teacher's classroom became a perfect snapshot of her first day, while 30 years of students merged into a gentle blur. "We're losing ourselves," Sheriff Foster realized, his own memories condensing around his swearing-in ceremony, becoming more like guardians of moments than complete people. The cartel forces and government agents faced their own choices. Those who had spent time in Val Vista felt the pull of potential anchor points, while others found themselves becoming increasingly disconnected from the stabilizing reality. "You need to decide," Ellie told them. "Either choose a memory to hold, becoming part of Val Vista's permanent defense, or leave before the barrier fully forms. There won't be another chance." Frank's team reported that the reality distortions had changed character. Instead of random fluctuations, they now appeared only in spaces between anchor points, like static between strong radio signals. "The coverage isn't complete," Ruth warned, marking gaps in their containment map. "We need more anchors in key locations, but every person who steps forward risks losing most of who they are." In the church, now a fortress of crystallized memory, the town clerk perfectly recalled 50 years of marriages, but couldn't remember his own. Each anchor holder's sacrifice became more apparent as their personalities simplified around their chosen moments. "This was always the real containment plan," Ellie revealed, watching the process unfold. "Not the facility, not the machinery, but people willing to give up everything except one perfect memory. Creating a landscape of moments so real that nothing else could break through." The DoD commander, understanding at last, made his choice. His memory of first discovering Val Vista during a childhood road trip became his anchor point, his military career fading into the background as that one moment gained perfect clarity. More cartel members and government agents followed, each choosing a memory that connected them to the town. Technical experts became living gauges of reality stability, their training condensing into pure understanding of what they monitored. William knew, Ellie told her core team as evening approached again. He knew that containing the anomaly would eventually require this kind of sacrifice. That's why he chose Val Vista, because he saw something special in its people, a capacity for dedication that could literally hold reality together. The strain on the anchor holders grew more visible. They remained themselves in essence, but simpler versions, their personalities distilled around their chosen memories like brandy, reduced to its purest form. "Look at the readings," Ruth said, her own memories increasingly focused on data analysis. "The barrier isn't just holding, it's getting stronger. Each anchor point is affecting the ones near it, creating a web of absolute certainty. But gaps remained in their coverage, critical points where reality still wavered, threatening to let other versions bleed through. And as night fell over the transformed town, Ellie knew they were approaching the moment she'd prepared for since 1962. "There's one more anchor point needed," she announced to her team. "The most important one. The memory that started everything, that made all of this possible." Because while Val Vista's residents had sacrificed portions of themselves to hold reality stable, Ellena Stewart had been carrying the weight of the final anchor for 50 years, a memory so powerful it could complete the barrier, but at a cost even she hadn't fully understood until now. The town held its breath, suspended between moments as solid as photographs and spaces where reality still rippled like water. The containment was almost complete, but the last step would require the greatest sacrifice of all. And as stars appeared in a sky that finally stayed in one place, Ellie Stewart prepared to give up everything except the one memory that could save not just Val Vista, but the very nature of reality itself. In the deepening night, Ellena Stewart stood in her farmhouse study, surrounded by the life she'd built over 50 years, photos, documents, and mementos, each one a piece of history she would have to let go, all except for one perfect memory that would complete the barrier around Val Vista. "The final anchor point has to be the strongest," she explained to Ruth and Frank, her closest allies now bound to their own crystallized memories. Not just a moment in time, but the moment that made all other moments possible. Through their monitoring equipment, they watched the network of anchor points pulse like a living thing. Each holder had become a beacon of absolute certainty, their chosen memories creating islands of unshakable reality in a sea of possibility. "The gaps are closing," Ruth reported, her awareness now perfectly attuned to patterns of stability. "But the largest one remains, right where the facility breach began. It needs something powerful enough to seal it permanently." Isabella arrived from the diner, her entire being now centered around that one moment with her father, but still aware enough to understand what was coming. "You've known all along which memory you would use, haven't you? Since 1962. Ellie confirmed, moving to the safe behind William's photograph. "Since the day we first understood what we were really containing here. Every other choice we've made has been leading to this moment." The remaining cartel forces and government agents had made their decisions. Those who couldn't commit to an anchor point had retreated beyond the forming barrier, while those who stayed had chosen their memories and accepted the transformation they brought. "The facility was never meant to last forever," Ellie continued, removing a final file from the safe. "It was just meant to hold things together until enough people could be gathered here. Enough connections made to create something stronger than concrete and steel." Frank's team reported that the reality distortions had reached a critical point. The spaces between anchor points had stabilized, but the breach site continued to pulse with potential, threatening to undo everything they'd accomplished. "Show them," Ellie instructed Ruth. Show them what William and I discovered that made all this necessary. Ruth activated a secured terminal, displaying footage from 1962. The images showed a younger Ellie and William documenting something impossible, a place where multiple versions of reality overlapped, where the laws of physics themselves became negotiable. "We didn't build the facility to contain something dangerous," Ellie explained. "We built it to give us time to understand what was really happening, to realize that reality itself isn't as solid as we think, that it needs people believing in it, remembering it, holding it in place." The footage continued, showing experiments and observations that defied explanation. But more importantly, it showed the moment Ellie and William realized what they had to do: create a town that could serve as a permanent anchor for reality itself. "Val Vista wasn't just built here by chance," Ellie told them. "Every person who felt drawn here, every family that put down roots, you were all chosen because you had the capacity for this kind of dedication, the ability to hold on to a memory so perfectly that it could help stabilize existence itself." The night deepened as Ellie prepared for her final role. The anchor, points throughout town, pulsed stronger, their holders now fully committed to their chosen moments, but the breach site continued to waver, waiting for the memory powerful enough to complete the barrier. "It has to be perfect," she explained, gathering the last pieces of evidence about that crucial day in 1962. "Not just a memory, but a moment so real, so absolutely certain that it can serve as the keystone for everything else." Through their surveillance network, they watched as reality itself seemed to hold its breath. The anchor holders throughout Val Vista maintained their vigil, each one a living photograph, preserving a moment of perfect clarity. "The moment you chose," Ruth realized, seeing the pattern at last. "It's not just about the facility or the anomaly. It's about the decision you and William made." Ellie nodded, touching her husband's photograph one last time. "The moment we chose to dedicate our lives to protecting reality itself, to building a town that could serve as humanity's anchor point in a universe more fragile than anyone suspects." As midnight approached, Ellena Stewart prepared to take her place in the pattern they'd created. She would retain her awareness, her sense of purpose, but everything else, every memory except that one perfect moment, would fade into the background. The price was enormous, but the alternative was unthinkable. Without the barrier, without these human anchor points holding reality stable, the very nature of existence would become uncertain, malleable, impossible to trust. Val Vista had become more than a town. It had become humanity's foundational memory, a place where chosen moments burned so bright that they could hold the universe itself in proper alignment. Midnight struck in Val Vista as Ellena Stewart stood at the breach site, surrounded by the shimmering air where reality still wavered around her. The network of anchor holders maintained their vigil, each one burning bright with their chosen memory, creating a web of absolute certainty that waited only for its final piece. "It's time," she announced to Ruth and Frank, who stood with her despite their own transformations. "Everything we've done, everything we've built, it all comes down to this moment." Through their monitoring equipment, they watched the pattern of anchor points pulse like a constellation drawn on the earth. Isabella in her diner, the hardware store owner at his counter, the school teacher in her classroom. Each one holding their perfect memory like a torch against the darkness of uncertainty. "The breach is responding," Ruth reported, her consciousness now perfectly attuned to the patterns of stability. "It's as if reality itself is waiting for the final memory." Ellie took William's photograph from her pocket, touching it one last time before setting it aside. Everything she'd been, everything she'd done over 95 years, was about to condense into a single perfect moment of memory. August 15th, 1962, she began, her voice steady as she focused on that crucial day. William and I stood right here watching reality itself ripple like water. We knew became her entire world. Val Vista, anchored by her ultimate sacrifice, stood as a monument to the power of human certainty. The shimmering air around the breach site settled, the chaotic ripples of possibility smoothing into an unwavering, singular reality. With Ellie as the final, most powerful anchor, the containment barrier was complete. The town's unique geography, its network of human memories, and the facility's hidden purpose intertwined to create a permanent shield. The anomaly below, the source of the shifting realities, was now definitively separated from their world, its existence forever sealed by a collective act of perfect recollection. The sun rose on a Val Vista that was both the same and profoundly different. The buildings stood solid, the shadows fell true, and the air was clear. The people moved through their day, each a living testament to an extraordinary choice. Isabella served coffee, her memory of her father handing over the diner keys vibrant and ever-present. Sheriff Foster patrolled, his swearing-in ceremony a steadfast guide. Each anchor holder lived within the perfect clarity of their chosen moment, their essence distilled, their purpose now inextricably linked to the town's new role. The remaining cartel members and government agents, those who had committed to anchors, now understood their place in this new reality. They would live out their days in Val Vista, guardians of the peace and unwitting keystones of existence. Those who had left the town found themselves unable to truly remember it, the place fading from their minds like a dream. Ellena Stewart, the 95-year-old former intelligence officer, remained at the breach site. She was still Ellie, yet she was also the living embodiment of August 15th, 1962, the moment she and William chose to dedicate their lives to protecting reality. Her consciousness, distilled to that singular perfect memory, became the silent, unwavering heart of Val Vista. She had turned the tables on cartels, outmaneuvered governments, and ultimately ensured that some truths, some fundamental questions about the nature of existence would remain forever buried, kept safe by the collective memory of a small Texas town. The war for Val Vista was truly over, and reality, as they knew it, was safe. Val Vista shifted subtly, its geography aligning perfectly with the pattern of anchor points. The town was no longer just a place. It had become a living mechanism, a human engine designed to hold reality itself stable through Bob G. Fay A S B O of Puences Bauf Bodubais D. Preserved memory. The remaining cartel forces and government agents witnessed something few humans ever would. The moment when reality itself chose its final form, anchored by the absolute certainty of memories, preserved perfectly against time and change. And at the center of it all stood Ellena Stewart, now and forever holding the moment that made all other moments possible, the moment when two people looked into the chaos of infinite possibility and chose to build something permanent instead. The barrier was complete, the anomaly contained not by walls or machines, but by the unshakable certainty of human memory. Val Vista had become what it was always meant to be: humanity's anchor point in a universe more fragile than anyone had suspected. Dawn broke over a Val Vista that would never change again. The town had become something unique in all the world, a place where selected moments burned eternally bright, held in perfect preservation by those who had chosen to become living anchors of reality itself. Isabella's diner still served coffee, but now every cup poured was somehow connected to that perfect moment when her father handed her the keys. The hardware store's shelves remained stocked, each tool somehow reflecting the day its owner learned his grandfather's lessons about community. "The containment is absolute," Ruth reported, her own consciousness now perfectly attuned to patterns of stability. "The anchor points have created a permanent barrier. Nothing from outside our reality can ever break through here again." The remaining cartel forces and government agents prepared to leave, knowing their role in this story was complete. They would file reports that mentioned nothing of reality's true nature, speaking only of failed operations and abandoned facilities. No one would believe the truth anyway, the DOD commander noted, watching his men pack their equipment. That reality itself needs places like this. Communities of people willing to hold on to their moments so perfectly that existence itself can't help but remain stable. Through their surveillance network, they watch the town settle into its new permanent state. Each anchor holder had found their place in the pattern, their chosen memories burning bright enough to illuminate the spaces between possibility and certainty. "They're not trapped," Frank observed from his final patrol. "They're still themselves, still living their lives. They just hold their moments more perfectly than anyone else ever could." The school teacher still taught her classes, but every lesson somehow reflected the perfect certainty of her first day. The town clerk still maintained records, but every document somehow connected to his crystal-clear memory of 50 years of marriages. And at the center of it all, Ellena Stewart stood in her farmhouse. Study. Eternally holding that crucial moment from 1962, the moment when she and William had understood what reality needed. Not walls or machines, but human hearts, willing to hold their truths with perfect certainty. "The facility beneath us doesn't matter anymore," she explained to those who came to say goodbye. The real containment was always meant to be this: a community of people whose dedication to their moments could create something permanent in an impermanent universe. The transformation of Val Vista was subtle, but absolute. Visitors would still come, still find a seemingly normal town, but they would leave with a strange sense of certainty, as if they had touched something eternally true in a world of shifting possibilities. "We're not just holding memories," Isabella realized, serving coffee in her unchanging diner. "We're holding reality itself in place, giving it a foundation to build on." The hardware store owner still helped customers find tools, each interaction somehow reflecting his perfect moment of understanding community service. The school teacher's students still learned, though each lesson carried the weight of 30 years of teaching distilled into one perfect day. "The containment is absolute," Ruth reported, her own consciousness now perfectly attuned to patterns of stability. "The anchor points have created a permanent barrier. Nothing from outside our reality can ever break through here again." The remaining cartel forces and government agents prepared to leave, knowing their role in this story was complete. They would file reports that mentioned nothing of reality's true nature, speaking only of failed operations and abandoned facilities. No one would believe the truth anyway, the DOD commander noted, watching his men pack their equipment. That reality itself needs places like this. Communities of people willing to hold on to their moments so perfectly that existence itself can't help but remain stable. Through their surveillance network, they watched the town settle into its new permanent state. Each anchor holder had found their place in the pattern, their chosen memories burning bright enough to illuminate the spaces between possibility and certainty. "They're not trapped," Frank observed from his final patrol. "They're still themselves, still living their lives. They just hold their moments more perfectly than anyone else ever could." The town would go on, unchanged yet eternally vital, each anchor holder maintaining their perfect memory, creating a web of absolute conviction that reality itself could not ignore. The price had been high. The loss of other memories, the simplification of complex lives, but the alternative had been unthinkable. Because in a universe where reality itself proved fragile, Val Vista had become humanity's anchor point, a place where chosen moments burned so bright that existence itself had no choice but to remain stable, permanent, true. And at its heart, Ellena Stewart would forever hold that crucial moment from 1962, the moment when two people looked into the chaos of infinite possibility and chose to build something eternal instead. A moment so perfectly preserved that it could serve as the keystone in humanity's greatest defense against uncertainty itself. The sun set on Val Vista one final time as a normal town and rose on something eternal. A place where memory and reality had become one, where certain moments would burn forever bright, holding the very fabric of existence together through the power of perfect remembrance. In the end, Val Vista had become more than a town. It had become a testament to human dedication, to the power of memory, and to the truth that sometimes the greatest strength lies not in changing the world, but in holding on to those perfect moments that make all other moments possible.